In this week's Training Focus, we're going to talk about the 3 steps in packaging evidence. Packaging evidence might seem easy, and it is easy, but there are some critical things to look for. So if you've ever been put in charge of packaging evidence, you may have come across some times that you're like, what do I put this item in, or what do I put that item in? And is it okay just to store it in this plastic temporarily, or maybe we'll put it in this bucket? Packaging evidence is critical because it protects the evidence, not only protects its integrity, but also protects it from being contaminated or degraded or cross-contaminated with something else. And so putting evidence in the proper container from the scene. Now, there may be times that you put something temporarily from the scene, and then when you get back to your evidence department or your lab or something like that, you might change it then. But there are some things to really consider. Of course, one of the main things to consider with evidence is chain of custody. Be sure that whoever collects it and whoever is in possession of it until the time that it's secured in an evidence room, and someone still has possession of it, chain of custody is not broken. If chain of custody is broken, it doesn't matter what you put it in, you have a good chance of losing that evidence in court. So different kinds of evidence obviously require various collection methods, but not only is the collection method important, it's what you put it in after you collect it. Now, most evidence that we're going to have is probably going to ultimately put in paper or plastic bag of some kind. Now, that can be a bag. That can be a small envelope of various sizes, and plastic bags of various sizes and shapes. But there's more to it than that. What goes in there and what shouldn't? If you have wet items, obviously you should never, ever store wet items in plastic bags because it will deteriorate and grow and mildew, and you will decomp blood and things like that, and it will be no good. Now, there are times that you might have to put something wet, like a wet clothing item, in a plastic bag from the scene to your office so you can then take it out and have it dried correctly before storing it in paper. It is best if you have the ability to get it refrigerated quickly. That is obviously best. But do not store it long-term in plastic. Obviously, if it's dripping blood and you do not have the ability to dry it or cool it at the scene, then you're going to have to put it in plastic to get it back so that then you can dry it. But long term, we don't put anything wet, obviously, in plastic unless it's frozen. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say you've decided to collect baby bottles in an infant death case and it's got formula in it and you're keeping them for some reason. You can take a sample of that and store it in a proper container, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then not keep the rest of the bottle. Or if there's small amounts in the bottles, you can keep those. You can put them in plastic and freeze them. If you freeze them, then that will store just fine in plastic. But you would never want to put those on a shelf in room temperature or in a refrigerator because obviously those will decompose. Now, when you're looking at biological evidence, anything that you're going to have tested for DNA or anything biological, whether it be any form of body fluids, blood, saliva, semen, urine, something like that, it will need to be dried and put in a breathable container. Now, that's usually a paper bag. You might put it in a small box, depending on what your sample is and how you want to protect it. But it needs to be something that obviously is breathable and does not retain condensation. Now, if you think that there could be a condensation problem, you can put a moisture absorber inside the box or the bag, and that will help prevent condensation, maybe from hurting your item. But DNA, biological type evidence, should be stored obviously dry and in something breathable. Trace evidence, hairs, fibers, something like that, something small, a small piece of fingernail, something like that. One of the main things you've got to consider is not losing it. So it needs to be put in a container that it cannot accidentally fall out. So you might put in a pharmacy fold paper and then put that inside a paper envelope. You might use a small paper envelope inside another paper envelope. What you don't want is just to take this fiber and put it in an envelope and seal it. Because then once you open that envelope, that fiber, that hair could be off in the wind, and you've got no way actually to be prepared and to protect that. Let's talk about guns for a moment. Guns, although, on suicide cases, we always talk about never picking guns up and putting them in a patrol cars before investigators get there, although sometimes that still happens. A gun should be stored in a gun box. Pistols, rifles, and shotguns, they have boxes to fit those. So if you're going to collect a gun, now, if you're collecting a gun that has no evidentiary value, like I guess maybe a found gun, or maybe you took a gun from somebody at a domestic call, if you're a police officer, something like that, possibly. But if you're going to have the reason to seize a gun, then there might obviously be reasons to have that gun either fingerprinted or tested for DNA or in some other way manipulated by the lab. That gun should be placed in a gun box, zip tied to the bottom of that gun box, and labeled correctly, of course, after it's unloaded and cleared. And you don't want bullets rolling around in there. You need to make sure the bullets are secure. Of course, if you're going to take the bullets out of the magazine, or if you have loose bullets, each bullet needs to be put in its own small bag or box. Now, you don't have to take it out of the magazine if you don't want to, necessarily. A lot of that depends on your evidence person. But if they are loose, you don't want them rolling around in there loose. Over the years, however, I have seen and I have heard about officers that will pick a gun up and they will put it in a paper bag. They will then seal the paper bag or fold it over, and then they'll deal with it later when they get back to the office. Here's the problem with that. If you're looking at possibly fingerprinting, having the weapon fingerprinted and or analyzed for DNA, if you throw it in the bottom of a paper bag and the paper bag rolls around or gets knocked sideways or gets picked up wrong, there's no protection for that gun or any other item for that matter that would be in that paper bag. So guns, if they're going to be seized from the scene for any evidentiary value, they need to be zip tied to the bottom of an appropriate box before they leave the scene and immediately upon being collected and cleared. If you're going to collect liquid needs to be stored in some type of glass or approved plastic container. I say approved because not every plastic container is approved for every type of liquid. And if you don't know what liquid you're collecting, then it should probably be in glass. And then that glass needs to be put inside another container, like a plastic bottle or something that will protect the glass tube, because you don't want the glass tube to get broke. So obviously you want to protect it. If you have soil or you have ash, something like that, then metal paint cans are good. Now, these are brand new unlined paint cans, and you can put the items in there. You don't want the lined paint cans because you can leach chemicals out of that into your sample. Knives, syringes, screwdrivers, any type of sharp object, certainly dangerously sharp object, should be put in approved containers. The plastic tubes for syringes. A knife can also be put in plastic tubes for knives and sharp instruments. For knives, if you don't have that and you do have a gun box, then zip it to the bottom of a gun box. Again, don't put it in a paper bag because the gun's going to poke through and hurt someone. So the thing that you have to really consider when you're on the scene looking at evidence is how does that evidence need to be collected that it will preserve long term, it will not degrade, it will not spoil or spill, and you can testify that from the time you recovered it throughout its entire process, it has been protected. So a lot of this is common sense. Obviously, we're not going to put hot ashes in a paper bag. We're not going to put bloody clothes store them in a plastic bag. We're not going to put liquid in a glass vial and throw it in a paper bag or a plastic bag. What's common sense? But along with that common sense, are you using the appropriate item? Again, glass container versus plastic container for liquid. Be sure it's an approved container. If you're using cans, be sure they're unlined. If it's a biological type evidence, like let's say a swab that you've swabbed a blood spot, or you got a buccal swab or something. Those are normally stored in their own cardboard box. They usually have holes in the side that you can use, one for drying and two for some airflow, but they are in approved boxes. You don't want to take that and just drop it into a paper bag. Be sure you're using the right item, the right container for the evidence that you're looking for. You're going to be the one on the stand that has to explain why this evidence is lost or not admissible because of the way you packaged it. So this is a very, very quick overview, but I would suggest that you research some articles on evidence collection, take a class, get a book, do something to learn more about evidence collection. What type of evidence goes into what container? What containers are approved for what? How long items will store in each container? Do they need to be changed? Is there anything else need to go in there, like an oxygen absorber or a moisture absorber? All of those things are important to know, because if you don't do it right, you'll suffer the consequences in court. And we always, we want to do it right. Hey, if you have not subscribed to the Death Investigator magazine, you need to do that today. This is a free online magazine, comes to your inbox every single month, and it is dedicated to the field of death investigation and all of those supporting roles. Each edition is packed with timely articles, interactive links to videos and audio training, and lots of extra. Articles are written by industry professionals. There's training announcements from various organizations across the country. And best of all, it's focused around our profession and our lives. There's articles in there that not only help you be a better investigator, but there's articles to help you be a better human, to be better in your family, to be better in your finances. This publication is a well-rounded publication that is focused on you. So subscribe today. Go to deathinvestigatormagazine.com and get your first free issue, and then one each month thereafter.